Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and welcome to part 2 of my dungeon design series. In part 1, we went over my approach and my philosophies on the physical dungeon itself. The style of construction, the type of population, if any population, its functional history, its layout, and those aesthetic features that can't really be shown on any map but do enhance the player experience. Probably a little bit more than most people are wanting without even getting to any of the fun stuff. Well, today we're going to cover the fun stuff. This video is going to be covering traps, rewards, and objectives. Now, this video was originally just going to be covering traps, but as the first video kept getting longer and longer, I ended up moving that other stuff here. Now, as before, this video is system neutral, meaning that it doesn't really matter if you're going to be using your dungeon for D&D, or Call of Cthulhu, or Traveler, or whatever else. The same general concepts are going to apply. I leave those mechanical factors up to you. First, let's go over traps, most people's favorite part, including my own. Traps get a lot of attention in tabletop role-playing games, but between the various games and all the various additions and weird misunderstandings, a lot of things get called traps that really aren't traps. So, to cut down on any confusion of terminology, let's break this down with some definitions and then go over each of those in detail. Obstacles and puzzles are hurdles that must be overcome, usually through player cleverness or character skill. These may or may not have intent in the design behind them. Threats are an immediate danger and require a character action to stop or avoid them. Actual traps are designed to be hidden, and when a trap is triggered, something happens, usually bad. The key factors are the unknown and intent. Without both, it's not a trap. Hazards present an unseen danger, kind of like a trap, but without the intent. These are often natural features such as rotted floorboards. Tricks are kind of a hard-to-define gray zone area, but are cases where magic or advanced technology creates a danger, but not for the reason that's in the other categories of it being a trap or a puzzle or anything like that. The most common is user error on the character's part. Now, these are the big 5 categories as defined by me. Now, some games do have their own definitions, but these are mine, and in some cases, we're going to have combinations, and we should have combinations where something transforms from one category to the other, such as a trap becoming an obstacle. First, let's cover obstacles and puzzles. Now, these are the same thing, but at different levels of complexity. Most of these are going to be pretty obvious when they're encountered. A simple example of an obstacle being an open pit of spikes. It's plainly there, just in front of them, but the problem is that the players need to cross this pit of spikes. Now, most obstacles have no correct way to solve them. So for this pit here, they might fly, they might teleport, they might jump, construct a bridge, come up with some sort of over-complex system of ropes and pulleys. This might require that they have certain equipment or magic or making skill rolls, but it always requires that the players think of how they're going to overcome this obstacle. They decide what their way is that they're going to go through it, and then if we need to, we then use the game mechanics to determine how well they did that. Obstacles may or may not have some sort of intent behind their design. Crossing a giant ravine or climbing a cliff are certainly obstacles, but there's not really intent. They're just simply there. Meanwhile, in the adventure White Plume Mountain, we have the hanging discs above a boiling lake of mud. Now, that is designed by an NPC creator with the intent of it being an obstacle, so it's just not deceptive about what it is. It's pretty plain what it is that they're looking at. Now, puzzles are obstacles, but have a less obvious means of overcoming them, a much narrower path of correct answers. For example, an impassable door. The player characters come across this impassable door, and they know that they want to get to the other side of it, but outside of boring a hole through the earth itself or some massive overkill of resources, the only way to unlock this door is to do something specific. Now, personally, I loathe the use of riddles as puzzles in RPGs, such as in Fellowship of the Ring. We get to the Mines of Moria, but the only way to open this impassable door is through a riddle where they have to say a specific word. Now, some players love riddle puzzles in their game, but most players, in my experience, hate them almost as much as I do. Now, I'm also not a fan of puzzles that rely on player knowledge, like a player's ability to read Latin, or a player's ability to read music, or their mastery of some sort of obscure trivia. Other than just general problem-solving skills and cleverness, I think those are the best way to do a puzzle. I prefer puzzles that have a key or require a key or a specific order of operations in order to solve them. And as I briefly covered in part 1 video, the solution or key should be somewhere in in the dungeon itself, meaning that the player characters, they don't have to leave the dungeon to get the key. It's already going to be there, or is something that the player characters came to this dungeon with. They were already armed with this key. The example could be, and this is one that I used in a previous adventure, so feel free to steal it, is the characters follow a hallway that's lined with torches that are on these 6-foot-long metal rods. So they make it to a room with several large columns and a massive statue against the wall. There are no other exits to this room, but the characters are certain there's going to be more to this dungeon because they haven't found what it is they're looking for. So looking around, they quickly discover scrape marks on the floor, and they figure out that the statue slides forward, but it's just too massive to move on their own. So further searching in the room discovers that one of the stone columns can rotate. However, none of them are strong enough to rotate this thing by hand. They also notice that several holes have been bored in this pillar. They're deep and about half an inch wide. So this is the puzzle. Rotate the column and slide the statue out of the way. Now, through magic or technology, they might make themselves inhumanly strong and just rotate this column on their own, but an easier method would be inserting poles into those holes and using that as the leverage to spin it, and if they don't have any staves or poles on them, they can simply use those long-handled torches that they saw back in the hall. So the players can quickly determine what the problem is. Finding the secret door was pretty easy for them to do. It might not have even required that they had a roll to do it. They might have just been given the hints once they walked inside, but solving the puzzle, the way of opening this door, that's the part that they're going to have to figure out, and figuring that out should be up to the players. And when I've talked about puzzles before, I've always gotten the comment about, how somebody's character is a super genius and they're far smarter than the character is, and that isn't fair to require that the player have to figure out the solution on their own. I have a lot of really strong thoughts here, and none of them are that nice. I mean, if the dice just did everything for us, then there's no room for player cleverness, then maybe those players should just go play craps instead. This is an intellectual game, meaning that player intelligence is just part of playing the game. However, Game Masters, if you do want to give a hint to your brilliant player characters, or if your players have tried a couple different things and they're well and truly stumped and now the game is ground to a complete halt, you might mention with an intelligence check that if they were able to somehow affix a handle or a lever to these pillars, that could give them the leverage to more easily rotate them around. And if they needed a little bit more, you might mention that those holes that are in the sides of the pillars, those look like they'd be perfect for inserting some sort of rod or a handle for that specific purpose. And if they still can't figure it out after that, you might allow, after another intelligence check, to mention something like those torches that were out in the hall. Those happen to be the exact same diameter as those holes that are in the column, so they could stick those in the column and rotate that around. However, I strongly urge that Game Masters allow players to have the time to solve the problem on their own before they start resorting to some sort of intelligence checks to turn the adventure on easy mode or just use as a helpline. Sometimes hints are going to be needed, but there's a wide difference between, letting them roll for a hint once they've gone ahead and tried a few things, or just letting them roll for the answer once they encounter a problem. Good dungeon puzzles should be relatively simple to solve. They might have several parts to them, but like in my video when I talked about running a mystery, the first thing that the players need to know is the fact that this is a puzzle. Don't make the fact that this is a puzzle be a puzzle that they have to first solve. Just go ahead and let them know and make it obvious. Next, they need to have the tools to solve it, so they need to be provided in the dungeon or be guaranteed to be in their possession. And finally, the puzzle needs to be logical. It's something that they need to be able to solve through the use of their own logic. Now, this could be informational, such as we know that the villain's computer password is the name of their deity, and we know by the bloody altar in the corner that the villain worships Cthulhu. There might be in-game magic or technology that's needed in order to solve it, like we have to cast this one specific spell to open up the portal, but either that spell it must be provided or 100% guaranteed to be in their possession before they walked into this dungeon, and there should also be some sort of hint that this is how the puzzle is going to be solved. Go ahead and let them have some sort of hint that this specific spell is what you need to cast here, rather than just saying, well, you need to cast a spell on this and letting them just kind of wildly guess and throw every single spell in their arsenal at it until they just randomly guess correctly. There needs to be some sort of hint or some sort of logic that this is the correct answer. One type of obstacle that I'm really leery about using is the type of obstacle that can only be solved by one specific character type, like the bone organ in the Goonies. It requires the map in order to get the song to play it. Easy enough, they were given the map at the beginning of the adventure. But it also requires that a character know how to read music and be able to play the organ. Now, that's great if the game master wants to give a moment in the sun for the organist character to shine and save the day. That is really cool, but that skill is so obscure and so specific that we can only pray that that player character isn't dead or incapacitated once they encounter the organ, or that the player didn't have to leave or miss the game, or leave early, or simply failed that one skill roll, the only one that could make that skill roll, and now the player characters are out of options and there's no way for them to open this door, get past this puzzle. Next, let's talk about threats. Threats present an urgent and immediate danger requiring that the player act in order to avoid something bad happening to them. These are usually the effects of the player's actions, such as they set off a trap, or they make too much noise, or some other action on their part. Or it might be that they reached a plot point and the game master decided to liven things up with a threat, such as you landed in the garbage compactor, so now the garbage compactor is going to turn on. A popular example is a flooding room. The player characters either need to escape this room or stop it before they drown. Simply doing nothing is not a viable option. Like with obstacles, threats need to be obvious. The characters need to know that they're in immediate danger. This is where the excitement comes from. They face dire consequences, but they still have the opportunity to avoid them. Threats are like obstacles with time limits. With normal obstacles, the player characters, they can take their time, maybe explore another part of the dungeon or the passages, come back to this obstacle later on. Threats are when they are not afforded the luxury of time in order to solve it. The walls are crushing in, a giant boulder is coming after them, a wall of fire is going to hit them unless they can shut the door in time, and the characters only have a short amount of time in order to react to save themselves. Now let's look at actual traps. Unlike obstacles and threats, traps are not obvious. They're intentionally hidden and they're triggered by the character's actions. Now these can be mechanical or magical, or some advanced alien technology that might as well be magical. Now this could be stepping on a floor stone or hitting a tripwire or whatever else. Activating the trap should have an immediate effect. Now this might be immediate damage, like spikes or spinning blades or falling into a pit of acid, or it might create an obstacle or a threat that the player characters now have to deal with, such as sounding an alarm and now the bad guys are coming, or it might release the threat of the door slamming shut, and now the water begins filling the room and they have to escape this room before they drown. Such as a character is moving up a hallway and hits a trap. Immediately a gate slams shut in front of and behind them. Now they're trapped. So this is an obstacle, they can get out of this, but then the wall starts closing in, turning this into a threat, because now they only have 3 rounds to escape this before they're crushed to death. The best way of not setting off a trap is by simply avoiding it, but the first thing we need to do is find the trap, or at least find the trigger for the trap. Now some games this requires a specific skill to do, maybe find traps or maybe perception, but depending on the situation of the mechanics of the specific game that you're playing, other skills might work for this as well, such as if this is a well-populated dungeon and there's a lot of foot traffic back and forth, a tracking skill might be able to notice that everyone seems to avoid this one specific spot on the floor, or if the player characters research this dungeon beforehand, it might be able to tell them the specifics of the traps before they even enter the dungeon in the first place. However, detecting a trap's trigger doesn't necessarily tell the player character what the trap does. This is like in Indiana Jones. He finds the trigger on the floor, but it's only after testing it out that he learns that it fires darts at him. Now, some traps might be able to be disarmed, but if possible, we might just simply be able to avoid the trigger altogether, turning the trigger into an obstacle that we have to avoid. Now, the key requirements for a trap is that it's unknown. We don't know certain factors about it. So once the characters know about it and they know where the trigger is, it's no longer a trap, but it's just simply an obstacle now. This is why in Heist, the player characters usually know of all the security traps before they walk in, meaning that the heist is about them overcoming the known obstacles in order to not set the alarms off. Or going back to everyone's favorite archaeologist, Indiana Jones, he could avoid all the traps until he got to the final one at the idol. And that's only because he had to directly deal with this one because he wanted to get the idol for himself. Then he fails his disarm traps roll and sets it off, which then activates the threat of him being sealed inside this dungeon, forcing him to run out. But now all those traps that he bypassed earlier are now obstacles that he has to avoid while fleeing, and now it's going to be a lot harder because he can't take his time. Things to consider with traps and obstacles obstacles is first consider their placement. If this dungeon is populated, why would there be a pit trap in the middle of a busy hallway? It's like laying a landmine in the middle of Main Street. It doesn't make sense. So maybe this dungeon, if it is populated, they all know not to step on that particular trigger, in which case our heroes might notice that there's a trap there because of a tracking roll, because their ranger or somebody can clearly see that. But maybe this trap has a release, like maybe it's not always armed. So consider if there's a disarm release for this trap and where that is. And the trap's purpose can answer this question, or at least provide a lot of answers for you. In the case of defenses, like the population is trying to keep invaders out of here, the release is going to be on their side of the trap, such as they all flee to some central location, they turn on the traps, they lift the drawbridge up, and they wait for the invaders to come and hit them. An example of this would be the movie Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. A wizard has a dragon that protects his lair, and this dragon is chained to the wall. However, at the far side of this dragon is a huge wheel that can tighten the chain down, pulling the dragon's head against the cave wall and allowing you to safely pass it. For other types of traps, the disarm switch might be on the player character's side of the trap, such as they discover a tunnel leading from the bad guy's lair and it's loaded with traps. But the bad guy, they sometimes need to use this tunnel themselves, so they know to rotate the candlestick to disarm all the traps before they go walking down it. So Game Masters, consider if any of the traps in your dungeon have a disarming mechanism and where that disarming mechanism is. Maybe the player characters can search the walls and maybe find it. Or in the case of that dragon, they can clearly see it on the far side of that obstacle, but the first thing they need to do is get one of the player characters past that obstacle in order to reach the disarming mechanism, so they can do that and allow the rest of the party to follow them. Next, consider hinting about the trap's existence. Foreshadow them. This might be done by finding a prior victim of a trap here, like we covered in a previous video, something showing how deadly the traps are, or maybe even what some of these traps do. Or we can have an NPC hit the first trap and let the player characters witness the effects firsthand. Maybe a friendly NPC companion, or maybe some low-level bad guy who's fleeing away from the player characters and they hit a trap, either because they didn't know a trap was there, or they're in their rush, they forgot about it and they hit this trap, and now the player characters know, oh my god, we don't want to hit one of those. Or we could do other hints about it, such as there's slots along the walls, and they can see those on the walls and the ceiling, but they don't exactly know what's going to be coming out of those or where the triggers are on the floor. Or maybe they notice that the stairs, they're going up some stairs and they realize that they're greased, and they realize that, this looks like it might drop into a ramp and we can go sliding down it. Or if it's the case of, let's say, a spiral staircase, maybe the stairs are greased, but along the outer wall, there's a bunch of spikes that are sticking out. They might have dried blood on them from previous victims because, it turned into a ramp and it slung them down and against these spikes. So the player characters go, oh my god, this thing's going to be horrible, but they don't know where the triggers are. And that really ratchets up the tension because the player characters know there is a trap, they know what it does, but what they don't know is where is it going to be safe for them to step. Now let's shift this over to hazards, which are kind of like pseudo-traps. An example would be a rotting floorboard or a rotted bridge. At a glance, it looks perfectly safe to cross, but if the character puts their weight on it, it's going to break. Another might be a partially flooded dungeon with unseen hazards, such as sharp and rusting debris or deep pits unseen below the surface. Character might be strolling through knee-deep water and then step into a 15-foot open pit and sink straight to the bottom, or stab themselves on some jagged object that was concealed beneath the surface of this water. Or you might have foul or toxic air or radioactive deposits, some weird magnetic deposit that draws all the iron and steel towards the walls, and now the fighter is slammed up against the walls and he has to peel off his armor to escape, or a thermal vent that blasts scalding steam down this passage every 15 minutes or so, or any number of natural phenomenon. Now, these are like traps in the sense that the danger isn't immediately apparent with them. However, unlike traps, there's no intention to harm or deceive. It's just simply there. Rotted floorboard is just a rotted floorboard. Now, of course, various skills such as perceptions or different actions such as probing the floor with a 10-foot pole that can reveal this hazard is before them, and it now turns this hazard into an avoidable obstacle. The final trap category is tricks, which is an old, almost forgotten D&D term, In the early days, traps were only mechanical traps, and tricks were kind of a lump term for puzzles and magical traps, or anything that wasn't a monster encounter or a mechanical trap that was just called a trick. Now, it was never really clearly defined, and between the different editions and the rules changes, it fell into obscurity, and not many people even know about this. So today, while I consider traps and obstacles, and those to be traps and obstacles, regardless if there's going to be magic involved in them or not, there's still kind of a tricky, hard to define zone where tricks still exist. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to commandeer the term and use it for myself, but please keep in mind, these things are extremely hard to define. So for me, tricks are when magic or advanced alien technology doesn't fall into the category of a trap or an obstacle or a hazard. These are things that the player characters, and therefore the players, they just don't understand how to operate them. They're not a puzzle to solve, because otherwise it'd fall into the category of being a puzzle, yet there's no intention by the trick's creator of this being a trap. So it doesn't have any intention, and it's not a puzzle. It's not trying to pretend to be something that it's not. It's just simply user error from somebody who doesn't understand what it is that they're using, such as an archway portal. You step through it and something happens to you. Maybe you're teleported somewhere else, maybe all your bones are replaced with rubber and you collapse to the floor, or you're now naked, or your character switches sexes. In old D&D adventures, these were usually treated like some sort of aha, gotcha gag, a definite trap, and something that antagonistic GMs love to abuse. Now, that's something that might work in a funhouse dungeon, but in a normal dungeon, I feel like things like this should serve a function, or at least have served a function to its builders. We just simply might not understand how it is that we're supposed to use that, or even if we can use it or not. For example, in the Call of Cthulhu scenario Bad Moon Rising, the player characters discover an alien moon base filled with giant, ancient, incomprehensibly advanced technology, but they don't have to engage with any of this stuff. It's more like background set pieces. But if they decide to start twisting some dials and pushing buttons, weird things are going to start happening, such as one device that turns your skin permanently transparent. That's all it does, and it serves as more of a warning that going out of your way to play with things clearly outside your comprehension comes with some serious risks. Picture a squirrel. The squirrel crawls on top of a power transformer and starts chewing wires and gets electrocuted. This transformer wasn't designed to electrocute squirrels. It wasn't designed to hurt anybody. The problem is that the squirrel couldn't understand the advanced technology that it was playing with. Or if the player characters discover a Stargate, they dial in 7 symbols at random and it turns on and they step through. Maybe it brings them to a lovely forest, or it dumps them in the vacuum of space. Now, some players might insist how them getting dumped into the vacuum of space was a trap, but it wasn't a trap. It was simply the player characters being a bunch of squirrels messing with something that they didn't understand. However, if somewhere in this dungeon is a key or a clue on how to use this device, if there's a way to solve this and that's hinted at, then this Stargate is not a trick, but it's a puzzle. It's only a trick if there's nothing to solve about it. The only way to use it is just by dialing random sequences of numbers and seeing where that takes you. There's not really any objective to it outside of it just being a thing that's there. More like some sort of novelty that the player characters can interact with, but maybe if they take it home and they give it enough time and they've got enough backup characters, they can figure out some way to use this and we can have some sort of cool device. But outside of that, it's really just a novelty that they probably shouldn't have been messing with. Another, let's say, is an altar to some god. Now, this thing is charged with power. Maybe it's good power, like it heals you if you touch it, or maybe it's evil power and it burns you. Or a fountain, and someone of a certain alignment can drink from this fountain and it's going to heal them. All those not meeting the qualifications, it poisons them or turns them to stone or gold or something like that. Now, these fountains, they serve a function. They're not traps, but the danger is simply our ignorance of what that function is. So while most magical or technological encounters in a dungeon are simply going to fall under traps or puzzles or obstacles, something that the player characters need to figure out how to avoid, tricks fall into that category when it's neither of those things. The danger they pose is no more malicious or deceptive than an empty light socket before some curious PC jams their finger inside of it. But tricks shouldn't require any sort of player character engagement. They might simply just ignore the thing and leave it be. The danger that a trick poses is only if the player characters are curious and they act on that curiosity. To me, tricks can be very interesting to use in your dungeon, but only if used very sparingly, like very sparingly. Otherwise, it's getting used to being kind of close to being an antagonistic game master that's just trying to trap their players into something, and I'd much rather have my magical devices be traps or puzzles or obstacles that the players can overcome rather than just something that's simply there. Now, the big reason that I'm laying all these categories out and defining them the way that I am is because many gamers lump them all together under the shorthand term traps, which can then be problematic when you have things like a find trap spell and it's going to be cast in your game. I've gotten into this debate a lot during different game reviews when I've mentioned how a find trap spell wouldn't work on puzzles, hazards, and tricks. So Game Masters, in order to prevent these sort of misconceptions at your table when a player is attempting to use magic or technology or some character special ability to detect traps, and you need to be able to consider what it is you define and call a trap, and what's something that you consider more of a puzzle or an obstacle or a hazard or a trick, but is definitely not a trap. Again, this completely depends on what system it is that you're using, so there's no universal answer that I could give that works across all games and all editions of every game. There are two big guidelines that I believe about dungeon traps. First, that they should make sense. Like with a dungeon, the traps inside of it need to follow the same logic. We already covered placement, but where they are should be logical, but the trap itself needs to reflect that technological and magical ability of those who created it. A high-tech research building is probably going to have high-tech traps. Primitive culture is probably going to be making some low-tech traps, such as falling rocks or swinging logs. And if we have a primitive culture that's taken up residence inside a former high-tech facility, you can have a mix of those two, such as in some places we're still going to have the still functioning high-tech traps of the original builders, but in other places we're going to have the primitive traps that are set up by the people that are currently living there. Furthermore, a game master should understand the basic of the trap mechanics and to ensure that it's logical, like an 8-foot spear that's launching out of a wall that everybody can clearly tell is only 3 feet thick. You don't need to know all the ins and the outs of the trap, the weights and the gear rotations or anything like that. Most traps are going to fail once you start looking a little bit too close at them. But the general broad stroke concepts behind how this trap works, the game master needs to know, such as you step on a trigger stone and a spiked ball comes swinging down from the ceiling. The game master should know, if there's going to be a spear or a spike that comes out, is it going to be coming out of the left wall, the right wall, the ceiling, the floor? Is it going to come out of the wall in front of them or behind them? Maybe if it does, there's another player character or some other obstacle that's now in the way, and now the trap hits that. Or maybe the trap hits multiple player characters, just depending on where it comes from in relation to the trigger. Or if the trigger is small, such as it's a small stone on the floor, maybe the first person that crosses that isn't going to set off the trap. Maybe we could do it off of a luck roll or something like that. So now the first person steps over it, the second person steps over it, but the third person, they stepped on the trap and they're the one that gets hit by it. Or maybe they step on the trap and then that spear comes shooting at them from the front and it hits the person in the front. It's like in part 1 when I talked about giving the dungeon at least a small effort in appearing like it has structural integrity to it. And you should consider that. Just give it a little bit of effort. It goes a long way in selling this place as being believable. But there's also benefits to learning to how primitive technology works or could work. For example, if you check out the 1955 film Land of the Pharaohs, not a great movie, but it shows how sand was used to lower heavy stones like walls and ceilings. But aside from being able to explain how these tons of weight are being held up, it shows a game master how they can describe sand gushing from holes in the walls or from behind statues as stone doors lower into place. At the end of the movie, as we get to see the elaborate mechanism of how they sealed the pyramid, that part is definitely worth a watch. If a trap is reloadable, like we have a crossbow that's hidden in a wall, there should be some way to rearm this crossbow, like a narrow access hallway or some sort of hatch that somebody could open. And maybe the player characters, they could get to this hatch. Maybe they could hide inside of it, or maybe they could get some of the crossbow bolts that are hiding inside there with it. I've encountered a lot of game masters who feel that they don't need to come up with some sort of explanation of how a trap works. They just simply say magic, as if that explains away any logic holes that they have. And I find that to be just a really cheap excuse. For example, going back to Raiders of the Lost Ark with the light trap. That trap makes no damn sense. It's built by a primitive people, yet the trigger is by crossing a beam of light. How does this trap possibly work? Indy doesn't believe in magic, yet he instantly and casually figures out what this trap is or that it's a trap in the first place. The logic of his world doesn't support this trap's existence. And if your trap doesn't follow logic, then that's going to pull your players out of the game. It's going to simply just turn them into relying on dice dice rolls and not critically thinking about your traps or your dungeon, because the game master clearly isn't critically thinking about it either. The second big tip that I can give with dungeon traps is that repetition can quickly become monotonous. Overusing the same thing gets boring, no matter how cool it was the first time that you used it. The secret to awesome dungeons is mixing it up between obstacles, threats, hazards, and traps, as well as the specifics of each type that you use. Diversify them. Have the traps in one dungeon be completely different than any of the dungeons that they've previously encountered. Don't necessarily have them always cause damage to the player characters. Mix it up. Have a trap goes off and it creates an obstacle or a threat. Then mix up what those obstacles and threats even are, how they can be overcome and what they do. That makes the game, more exciting, more fun, because the players have not seen any of this before, even if they've seen the individual parts used in different ways. Every dungeon should have at least one trap or one feature or one obstacle that your players have never encountered before. I don't mean the characters have encountered before, I mean the players have never seen before. As far as where we can get our ideas, because that's a lot of ideas you're going to have to be using, there are tons of great places to steal from. Movies, video games, steal from other game masters. There's websites and books like Grimtooth's Ultimate Trap Collection. Steal from those and use the ideas that can make your dungeon fun, engaging, and memorable for your players. Now let's look at rewards. Now these aren't the objectives or the big treasure that they might find at the very end of the dungeon, but the rewards that they find along the way. These should be sprinkled about. Most often this is going to be in the form of treasure, money, gear, possessions, and other valuable loot like that, but it can also be in the form of clues. And I don't just mean the loot that the player characters pull off of defeated opponents. There is definitely that's going to be a factor, but I'm talking about rewards from the dungeon itself. Like the player characters, they might discover that hidden passage that allows them to bypass a particular obstacle. That's their reward. Or maybe they find a ring of keys somewhere that unlocks many of the locked doors inside this dungeon, and now they don't have to worry about picking the locks or smashing the doors open. Or maybe some long dead corpse of some long dead adventurer that crawled into a niche and died, and on them they're going to find a note with a hint about some sort of threat further up ahead, or maybe a partial map of this dungeon, either what this dungeon looks like or what it looked like before in a previous incarnation. And it shows that there used to be a passageway that bypassed this particular threat, but that's now sealed up with a wall. But maybe that passageway is still there if they can knock down a part of the wall and they can get through that and bypass that threat. That's their reward for searching the wall and finding this little niche. Or they might find something that might not be valuable to them per se, but it might be valuable to something or someone else inside this dungeon. Something that they can negotiate with, something that they can use to their advantage, even if it itself isn't that valuable to them. Rewards are your little treats that keep your players going, keeps them exploring. So I suggest putting your rewards in interesting places, such as kudos for looking there, encouraging them to do that more, explore around, see what's around here. Maybe you'll find some more rewards. However, you also want to keep it logical as far as what they find. I hate it in video games whenever you find a ton of loot, but it seems to be completely random and nonsensical, and where it is and what it is doesn't make any sense at all. So whatever rewards that you do and where those rewards are found, that should make sense. Maybe not immediately make sense, but eventually it should make sense as to why these treasures are where they're found. Now, one map that I always found inspiring was this limestone cave from the old AD&D Catacomb Guide. And apart from imagining what monsters and traps I might put in here, was this specific ledge. What treasure could I put on there, and how might the player characters get to that ledge? Would they try to lower themselves down from up above, or maybe try to climb up at it from up below, the waterfall pounding against them? So when I looked at this map and I saw that ledge, I thought, I'm going to put something there, either to tempt them to try to get to that ledge or rewarding them for exploring it. Finally, let's talk about objectives. What are the characters doing in this dungeon? Now, the most popular of these is the old going inside to defeat the bad guy or get the special treasure, and that's perfectly fine. I have used that a lot myself, and usually the goal is going to be found in the final room of the dungeon, and that is also perfectly fine to do. It forces the player characters to go through the whole dungeon in order to get to the final room. However, unless there is a reason why the bad guy is not going to leave this final room and go deal with these intruders that are causing all sorts sorts of commotion, or might just simply leave the final room to go visit the kitchen and make themselves a sandwich, they probably just shouldn't be permanently waiting in this room for the player characters to show up and kill them, kind of like Bowser in Super Mario Brothers. Now, one common complaint with this style of dungeon plot is that the heroes, that they take a back entrance to get to this place, or they go straight to the bad guy and defeat them, it now leaves them no reason at all to explore the rest of this dungeon. They just go home and high-five themselves. Now, that's possible to do. Sinister Secret of Salt Marsh, one of my very favorite AD&D adventures, the player characters can explore the haunted house, eventually working their way down to the bad guy, or they might just find the sea cave entrance and go straight to him without even going inside the haunted house. So consider doing a scavenger hunt. These are where the player characters have to find multiple objective points at different parts of the dungeon. Maybe they have to gather multiple items to open up a portal to reach the bad guy, like Ghost Tower of Inverness, or they have multiple objectives inside the dungeon itself, such as rescue the prisoners who are at one location and then recover the treasure or fight the bad guy at another location. This now means that the player characters are going to have to crisscross and explore this dungeon in order to find all these objective nodes. Another dungeon plot you can do is the prison escape. Now, this might open with the player characters, they've been captured and they wake up in their dungeon cells and they don't necessarily know how they got there. Or maybe they came to this dungeon to explore it or with some sort of goal in mind. They walked inside, then they hit a trap in the first room and the floor dropped and they opened up to a slide and they landed inside these cells, and now the player characters are going to have to break out of these cells, find some equipment, and escape this place. Or maybe they're not prisoners, but they have to escape the dungeon because it's sealed behind them and now they can't get out of it. Maybe mix this up with a scavenger style with multiple steps involved to getting out of this place, such as they have to restore power to the main reactor, then they have to download the files from the laboratory's computer, then they have to engage the self-destruct, and then they can get to an escape pod. Another twist is the speed dungeon, where the threat pushes them to go through this dungeon as fast as possible. That was a huge hit with us when I did this. It was a dungeon that was deep beneath an island that was in the middle of a lake. So the player characters, they arrived at the dungeon and used one entrance that quickly defeated the bad guy and got the important item that they came here for. However, the bad guy's magic was the only thing that was keeping this dungeon together, keeping the water out. So once they died, the part of the wall crumbled and water started rushing in and destroyed the way that the player characters got to the dungeon, so they couldn't use that. So now they had to escape this entire dungeon by going through new territory that they hadn't seen before, as water is rising every foot, like a foot every round or two, sealing off floors as they're racing to get to the top of this place, all the while fighting monsters and trying to score some of this treasure while the imminent threat of drowning is constantly chasing them. There's also heists, where the objective is trying to get inside and recover some item or rescue some prisoner without alerting the bad guys. I have a whole video I've done dedicated to those if you want to see how I do heist adventures. Then there's the test. These are usually funhouse-style dungeons where the builders have made an elaborate course for testing the heroes out. Maybe it's a wealthy noble seeking to have a worthy champion, but the champion must first pass this test of heroes. Or maybe it's for some twisted amusement from the creators, like the VIPs in Squid Game. That's the plot for White Plume Mountain, which has the title for being mentioned the most in this series. Maybe this test is arranged by a guild or an organization that the player characters might want to join or might want to advance up in the ranks for, so now they have to run this gauntlet, this test, to prove that they're worthy. So you can make it a themed one, where it's like a thieves guild. They might have a thieves run, where you have to do different thieves skills, or a magic one testing a spellcaster's abilities, or a warrior battling their way through some sort of course to prove that they're worthy to advance in the ranks or gain membership to this organization. Another funhouse-style dungeon I've employed and was a huge hit with us was shifting dungeons. This is where the layout changes shape during the course of the adventure, like that temple in Alien vs. Predator. The one that I used had 4 configurations, and whenever the player characters reached one of the objective nodes, the dungeon would reconfigure itself, and the grinding a stone as walls slid into place, and everything changed shape. So once they emerged from that room, they found themselves inside an entirely different dungeon, with new rooms that opened up. Some of them were the same where they were, but they had changed shape. Maybe they're bigger or smaller, but they could still recognize pieces of it, such as that wall that they had scorched earlier with the fireball. They can recognize that wall, but that wall is now in a room, and before it was in a hallway. It's kind of like they could recognize the Lego pieces that the dungeon was built from, but they couldn't recognize this specific configuration that was done with those Lego pieces. Then, of course, Unsafe Passage, where the heroes aren't trying to get any item out of the dungeon, but merely using this dungeon to get through through it to the other side, kind of like the Mines of Moria, where they're bypassing the mountains. Another old favorite AD&D adventure of mine is All That Glitters, where the dungeon is them going through this enormous magic subway-type tunnel built by an ancient forgotten people, trying to get to the opposite side of this place where the second half of the main adventure takes place 1,000 miles away. There are countless other types of dungeon plots, more than I could ever list or think of, so look in the comments below. I am sure there's going to be a well of cool ideas of different ways you can use dungeons in your games. Okay, well that is it for the dungeon design series, or at least my philosophy and approach to dungeon design. There are a lot of different philosophies out there and approaches, so after a little bit of trial and error, every game master is going to develop their own. So hopefully this was helpful in some ways that you might want to do or might not want to do if you don't agree with this. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. After all the adventure modules that I talked about in this adventure do have dedicated review videos, so if you want to see any more of those or any more of my stuff, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. Never fear, the star of the show is here. Let's get recorded on this. What the hell? Is he done recording already? Hey, Todd. Yeah? What the hell, man? You're supposed to call me before he started recording. He's already done. I told him to give me a call before he started Oh, wait. 12 missed messages. Oh, sorry, dude. I had it on silent. Oh, well, that is just freaking great. I'm out of sick days, man. What am I supposed to do now? Oh, well, since you're here, you want to play a game? Might as well. Scoot over.